Welcome to the Vet Med Wellness and Leadership Podcast, where we discuss central challenges vet med leaders face, such as burnout, stress, and difficult interactions with clients and staff, just to name a few. In each episode, you will hear about actionable solutions that you can apply to your practice and invitations to connect with fellow leaders who are passionate about improving the wellness of the vet med profession. By subscribing, liking, commenting, or sharing this podcast, you are helping more veterinary professionals find the resources shared in these episodes. Thank you in advance for listening and supporting this show. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Hello, everybody. Crystal Stokes here. And joining me today is Debra Hamilton, who is an attorney mediator helping people who love animals and work in the animal service industry transform conflicts. The human-animal bond is strong, and so is our human reaction to perceived mistakes and criticisms. Debra's work helps those who work with and love animals engage in more peaceful interactions for the benefit of all, especially the pet. So Debra, I am really excited to have you on today, and I love the topic of conflict because it is so stressful for people.
It is so stressful. And when you throw in the beloved animal, there are no boundaries. There is absolutely no ability to get out of your amygdala and get back into your prefrontal cortex, which means you're reactive and defensive. You're not thinking and contemplating and trying to collaborate. So my practice helps people, similarly to yours, just learn skills that will help them not be so reactive, or if they're reactive, recognize it and take a breath.
I love it. I cannot wait to dive into this topic today. And before we do, I'd love to just learn, how did you get to where you are today? Because you have a really interesting backstory, so do tell.
I do, because I'm an attorney by training. I was an assistant district attorney, which means I'm a litigator from the get-go. And in 2010, I decided that I needed to do something different because I had a case where someone had adopted a rescue dog, and the rescue took her to court because she wouldn't return it for them to whelp the puppies. And I said, there has to be a way we can talk to each other. And there was no way. The plaintiff's attorney was a pro bono, very large firm. I was a solo practitioner. My clients paid thousands of dollars to defend themselves. And at the end of the day, we won. We got to keep the dog and the puppies. And I felt very bad for the rescue because not only did they lose the puppies that they could have placed and gained money from, they lost someone who was a longtime supporter of their rescue. And at the end of the day, I walked out of court and I said, there's got to be a better way. So that was when I realized litigation was not in my future, because pets are property and you really cannot address the emotional side of conflicts over animals in a court. So I studied mediation for about 4 years, not because I needed that much. Well, actually, it probably was because I needed that much, because as a litigator, it's hard to enable people to talk to each other, to find that answer without saying, well, why did you do this? And this is what they're going to end up with anyway, and I could have gotten them there in 5 minutes. Yet they needed to explore it, understand it, chew it up, spit it out, chew it up again, spit it out, and then realize, oh yeah, this is what we want to do. That's why I always say for the benefit of the people and the pets. Because what gets lost in the argument is what's best for the animal. It's usually just, I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to go to the mat to prove that you're wrong. So I started mediating, and it was really interesting because most of the animal law, animal welfare people were not necessarily fans of that. Veterinary medicine also is not necessarily a fan of that until they're sued. And you and I have spoken about the fact that there's a wonderful window where people can get together and have a conversation over a disagreement. However, if you require someone to sue before you can open that window, the chances of you being able to take ego out of the discussion is almost impossible. So what I do now is I either mediate conflicts between people over animals, or I conflict coach people, either the veterinarian or the pet owner or one side in a divorce or relationship breakup, or a breeder, or an owner, or someone who's being, chastised by the American Kennel Club because they misbehaved on a show site, I coach them on how to respond in a way that enables the other party to be their best selves. And ironically, that's because you're being your best self. You're realizing what you can do to help these things resolve for the betterment of everyone. Everybody is going to learn. You know that, Crystal. And conflicts, I'm not adverse to conflicts. I think conflicts are great. They provide for change. They provide for communication. They provide for people to feel as if they're heard, respected, and understood. It's how you do it that's so important. So what I do is I provide that platform where I either help the parties talk to each other, which is my favorite, or I help one side diffuse themselves, and by doing that, diffuse the other side so they can actually have that conversation they need to have.
Wow. I'm such a fan of your work, and people that know me well have heard me say, just like you said, I'm a fan of conflict, and it's not a popular thing to say, but when you explain why, I've always said, for me, conflict actually makes relationships stronger. The most robust relationships are the ones where they've learned to have productive conflict that helps them learn about each other, learn where the boundaries are, learn how to describe needs or to communicate that didn't work for me or that hurt my feelings, and to move through it. And you come out at a different level. And that kind of growth that can come from conflict done well really strengthens the bond and that sense of trust that we know we're going to go through this again. But now that we have a way of working through it, we actually don't dread it. But we're going to be okay when we come to that bump in the road. I think the work that you do as a mediator is just so necessary and helpful in getting people to feel more confident in their ability to navigate conflict. And I appreciate, too, you noting that even if you're only working on your side of the street, you may not have, and you don't have any control of what the other person does, what's going on in their mind, how they respond. But by simply focusing on what you can do on your side, that can have an impact on the other side of the street. So I'd really love to hear, I think telling stories is one of the best ways to learn about how this actually works. And if you can loop in, you mentioned like the amygdala and these things, how we get hijacked. I'd love to hear some stories, whether it's where conflict went really wrong and you help them get back on track, or some of your success stories and how you transformed a really difficult situation to take care of both the people and the pets.
Well, it always takes trust, like you said, and respect for yourself and for others. You have to, William Ury wrote a book, Getting to Yes with Yourself. You have to know what you're bringing in the room when you're having a conflict. Like you said, conflicts are good. They really do shift things that need to be shifted, or provide explanations for things that are in place already and why, so that people understand. But that only comes with the ability to feel safe if you're going to express some concern or disagreement with a policy or with how someone responded to another person. Usually when responses happen in the moment, we're in our amygdala, which means that's our little lizard brain, which keeps us from being run over by rocks or cars or, hurricanes. We run. That's our fight or flight or freeze or fawn, or there's a bunch of others that they've now connected to that. And so when you're in your amygdala, you cannot really stop yourself from saying those things. My mother always said, speak in haste, lament at leisure, because you're going to say something and you feel really good. All of us have that moment. I was so glad I thought of that while they were there, so I could tell Crystal exactly what I thought. I got her. And then when you leave, I don't think there's anyone who's going to listen to this podcast where they say, oh shit, now what do we do?
I know.
It'll be
in our mouth and we feel terrible. Yeah. And I think we fawn, right? I think I see the different strategies that people have where some, when their amygdala gets triggered, they go into that fight reactions. They might get bigger. They might say something that's not helpful at all. It could be hurtful. Another type kind of shuts down and pulls in, and they might not be able to speak up for themselves, and they regret that. They feel like they just got bulldozed and they didn't defend themselves. And both positions just feel really yucky.
And if you live in those positions, if you feel as if you're not being heard, respected, and understood, then if you swallow that enough, I'm sure you, Crystal, if you swallow that enough for so long, then you're going to explode over something that is really mundane. And people are going to look at you and say, how could you be mad over that? Well, that's because I swallowed 25 things I should have spoken up on, but I figured, I don't want to be a pain. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be the complaining person. However, if you learn how to bring something to the surface, right? When you speak that way, may I tell you how it makes me feel? And wait. And let them say, no, I don't care how you feel. Okay, I just want to let you know that there was something that really triggered me. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to let you know. I had that with a case of the breeder. And I love my breeders and I love my owners. And they all are driven by the love of the animal that they either brought into the world or that they bought from a breeder. And in this case, someone bought a dog. And they were an attorney, and they kept the dog running in the backyard with no fence, running in the woods, running in the fields in the backyard. Nobody was watching it. It was 8, 9, 10, 11 weeks old. And it must have gotten punctured by something. So it got an infection, sepsis in its elbow. And so it really started to get sick and go downhill. And this person was good. He called his breeder, and his breeder said, well, what's going on? And he said, well, it seems to be a little sick. And he sent a video where the dog wouldn't use any of his paws, and he was just a little guy. He was like 12 weeks old. So the breeder said, hey, let me come and get him, and I'll bring him to my vet. And when she saw him, the dog was a mess. So as you can imagine, she actually didn't say much, but her husband went to town and did a tap dance on this guy about how could you do this? This puppy was this puppy was that. And so the other party's ego got in the way. How could they say, I didn't take care of this puppy? Of course I took care of this puppy. And so they called me and said, we'd like you to go to litigation with us. I said, well, I can go to litigation. I said, I can hand you off to someone, or we can take a breath. We can decide whether or not we can shift the road down which this discussion is going. And at first, the attorney hired an attorney who was really horrible. And my client said to me, I hope you don't mind. I went and spoke to the puppy owner, which, of course, I didn't tell her to do it. And she did it on her own. But she had talked to me so long and so often in the week or so that we had been together that she said, I just listened. Like you told me, just listen, just appreciate what he feels. And she said, you were right. He just felt like we disrespected him and he didn't know how to take care of the dog. And that's why he was going to prove us wrong. And at the end of the day, we were able to get the puppy back. We were able to refund money. We were able to find another dog for this guy, and everything worked out really, really well. However, they were going down the road to litigation. There had been a summons and complaint. There were interrogatories. There was all this stuff. Thousands of dollars would have been spent, but we took a step back. We started to have a conversation. And this is what I do in every event that happens, because, as you know, if you have the peace of mind or the skills, and often we don't, especially if we're triggered, to recognize that feeling in us and just breathe. Just breathe. Because if you breathe, you're going to bring your amygdala back into your prefrontal cortex, and you're going to be able to just ask curious questions. I always say, please be curious. Don't be condemning. Yeah. Don't criticize someone. Just be curious. Tell me a little bit more, Crystal, what you mean. It's interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me, because I'm glad you told me. And can I have a few minutes to think about that? Because it really seems like it's very important to you.
Right. So let's pin that for those people listening. Pro tip number 1, slow way down and breathe. Right. See, we feel it's a lot about like mindful awareness. And I know we sound kind of woo here, but this is not evidence-based science. This is not woo. When you start feeling a flush of emotion, right, that rush of anger or frustration through your body, we all experience it a little differently, but generally it's like heat through your body, your heart rate goes up, you start feeling more agitated, you might feel tense.
Usually our focus becomes very narrow.
Endorphins are going at 90 miles an hour. Yep.
Pumped up. So when I feel that, and I'm saying for those listening, when you feel that, listen to what Debra said. That is a messenger that says, pause and breathe. Pause and breathe, because you are being hijacked and the animal part of your brain, that limbic system, is driving the bus, that little amygdala. You don't want it driving the bus. It is not making rational decisions, okay? It's fight or flight, freeze, not that helpful in this situation. So if you can breathe and slow down, that's where another part of your brain starts to come back online, your prefrontal cortex, which helps you think rationally, helps you slow down. And as Debra said, the next pro tip is be curious. Set all of your assumptions aside and just act like, even if you're faking it, I say fake it till you make it. Just ask questions so you can understand them better. Like if you were the one mediating it, what would you want to ask? And I think that people have that's one of the hardest skills that I have trained people on, is shifting into curiosity, shifting out of that kind of righteous anger. But once people practice it, I don't know if you've seen this, it becomes really contagious, because you're like, wow, like it totally shifted the conversation. Even if you 100% don't agree. You might be 100% on your side of the street being like, no, they're wrong. But if you just swallow that down for a few minutes and just ask curious questions, it is such a game changer. So keep going. You're at that point. I really want to drive that message home with people, because I think it gets kind of lost in the mix of conflict resolution, but it's so dang important. Breathe, then curiosity. Take it away, Debra.
Well, you're so right. And when I give workshops like you do, I give workshops where I provide hypotheticals, which everybody wants to rip their eyeballs out because, oh my God, another hypothetical. However, I usually give it's sort of spot on for an experience that group had, be it a breeder owner, be it a veterinarian, be it a couple, having a relationship issue. And I put them in a different set of shoes or I provide them with facts that either resonate with them or, wow, I never thought of that. So when I usually talk to people and provide these workshops, they sit there and they go, wow, this really happened to me. And I didn't know how the front desk person felt, or I didn't know how the client felt. It always drives me completely nuts when veterinary teams count their team as the people within the four walls. I said, so then you're not taking care of any pets? I said, because one of the most important team members is the client. I said, and you really need to know how to include, be transparent, and engage those people. I once went to a conference and I stood up. You'll get a kick out of this. And I said, I'm an attorney and I'm a breeder of Irish setters. How many of you think I'm your worst nightmare? And they all raised their hand. And I said to them, you don't even know me. I said, so right there, you're bringing something into the room that has nothing to do with me, because that's your last experience with someone who is an attorney, someone who is a breeder, or God forbid, someone who is both. And I said, this is the kind of thing you have to be aware of. So we talked about curiosity and questions and breathing, which is really important. The final piece that I would say is when you're listening and when you're being curious, when Crystal said, well, you have to be curious and you have to breathe, reflect that back to her. So what I heard you say, Crystal, is that it's really important to you that I ask questions that help you formulate what it is you want me to know. And you really appreciate the fact that I'm listening to you, really listening to you. I have given a number of programs to veterinarians, and their typical comment to me when I'm done is, but don't we have to answer them right away? And as I said before we got on, my mother used to say, react in haste, repent in leisure. I always go, you never want to respond right then and there, because you're both loaded for bear. Even if you are aware of your feelings, you are breathing, you are asking curious questions, you still might not be able to answer in a way that is going to be collaborative. It might be reactive and defensive. And there really is no reason you have to answer her right now or him right now. So, Crystal, you have given me so much great information. I want to appreciate that you had the strength to tell me what you were observing. And would it be okay if I got back to you on Friday? I'm free from 12 to 3. What time might be good for you? But you know, Crystal, as I will know, veterinarians are terrible about returning phone calls.
Oh, I don't know. I think it depends. I know some really good ones.
Well, my clients don't get calls back from their veterinarians. They get calls back from the veterinary manager, which really sends them into orbit. Or they get calls back from the vet tech, but hardly ever get calls back from the veterinarian, especially if the veterinarian perceives this as a crazy person who's in conflict. And I can tell you, I've had several clients who are absolutely crazy. I had one whose dog's liver was lacerated when it was spayed. And so she spent $35,000 on a routine spay. And she was beyond herself. I worked with her to calm her down, to have her write something that was more curious and thoughtful than, how dare you, and you created this, and why didn't you pay me? And at the end of the day, she got all her money back.
Wow. Yes. I mean, this is such, this topic I love so much because that sort of situation happens all the time. And I think the big thing I see that you help people with is just shifting from reactivity to a much more slow, thoughtful, collaborative process. Could you give a couple of examples, maybe just strictly from the veterinary realm, since the audience listening to this are corporate leaders all the way to our technicians and people boots on the ground doing the day-to-day work. And I think that this applies to all humans, honestly. But stories that maybe paint a picture of experiences that have happened between upset clients and the veterinary staff would probably be most helpful if you have a couple of those.
Oh, absolutely. Because it really is important within a vet practice. There are several really good vet practices that are taking the time to have a meeting. First of all, vet practices have to have meetings. I know it's against all the laws of nature to take an hour off and meet with your staff and listen to what's going on. But good leaders do that because they're never going to hear what's going on unless they take the time to actively listen, take time off and actively listen. Could it be at the beginning of the day? Could it be at the end of the day? Could it be at lunchtime? You know, if you're going to break for lunch, and it's not necessarily a bitch session, it's necessarily a listening session. And if you create the parameters and framework so that it is a safe space, that's great. I've had staff members who learned how to speak to a particularly difficult veterinarian who may or may not have had the ability to treat people with respect and help that veterinarian recognize the way in which he might work so that everyone will be more responsive to how he wants his things done. And I would say 9 times out of 10, if I work with the vet techs, they learn how to, I don't want to say manipulate, but that's basically what they're doing because they are helping that person be their best selves by saying, well, tell me a little bit more about why you reacted this way. And what did I do that triggered this in you? And what could I do differently? Because it's not about the fact that the vet tech did something. It's how the person reacts to it. I always say, and I'm sure you do too, Crystal, you can only control how you react. You cannot control how the veterinarian reacts, how the vet tech reacts. I always laugh. I don't know if you do, but I always laugh when people say, fire the toxic employee or fire the toxic pet owner, and you should always be able to fire these people. You shouldn't have to keep these people. And I go, you're absolutely right. I don't want anybody to be abused. I don't want anybody to be treated this way. And remember, you're taking yourself with you. So whatever created the atmosphere which enabled this person to be toxic is still there. Exit interviews are the most important, especially with the squeakiest, most horrible wheels, because you want to see and hear what it was that they observed. And don't push them off as like, oh, they're just complaining. They're just this, they're just that. Take it to heart that this is something that you might have to really engage in. And in my experience, the administration of a really good culture in a vet practice is getting much better, but still needs a long way to go. Unfortunately, because I don't know that veterinarians have enough training in school to really know. And it depends where they land, whether they become part of a culture that is mentoring and supportive, or part of a culture where you're flying by the seat of your pants and doing the best you can, and everybody is treated with a low level of disrespect, because that's how we treat everyone. And I don't know what your thoughts are, but that have been my thoughts when I've gone in and helped practices. My biggest pet peeve is when they sell a practice out from under a really successful, wonderful group and don't say a word. Now, my attorney colleagues say, well, it isn't anyone's place to know what this veterinarian's doing. And I said, I agree. I know that. I used to be an attorney. I wasn't a transactional attorney, but I know about transactions. However, unless that attorney can go in at 9:00 in the morning and do everything until 5:00 at night and still have the EBITDA, the income before whatever it is that EBITDA stands for. I know how to say it, but I don't know necessarily what it is. With no one in his practice or her practice, then to me, you need to bring those people along. And a lot of the transitions that happen deteriorate because people feel disrespected, unheard, distrustful, and the bigger companies that come in have an idea. And it's funny because I've spoken to a number of them and said, you should really have someone come in who's neutral to help you transition. And they say, well, really, we have our own people who come and are going to help us transition. I said, yeah. And how's that working for you? So my experience has been that we don't take time to really foster the success of any interaction that involves an animal, be it a breeder or owner. They don't talk. They hand them a contract. They don't even read it with them, and they don't tell them what they mean in the contract. So when they enforce a paragraph of the contract, the owner's like, what does that stand for? I didn't know I signed that. Even rescue contracts. They don't know they signed a rescue contract that said they could never give the dog to you, even though you're their significant other, because they signed the contract. They've never read the contract. I've had attorneys who are big, adopt, don't shop, and have never read the rescue contract. And I said, did you know you can't do this and this, and they could come on and take your pet? No. I said, go back and read the contract. Call me. Oh my God. Oh my God. And I said, yeah. I said, so you have to figure out how to have this conversation if, in fact, you want to leave the dog with your husband or your wife if something happens to you, but you don't have the right to do that because you signed a contract that said that it goes back to them. I said, the dog knows your wife. The dog knows your husband. That's where you want it to go. So for me, my practice is one where people have these open-ended conversations, ask open-ended questions, listen actively, be curious, breathe a lot. And if you feel it getting to be too much, it's funny when people call, they go, I want to mediate and get this done in one day. I said, my mediations are 2 hours long. That's it. And they go, why? And I said, because when you're talking about your animal, I said, it is really hard not to wear your emotions on your sleeve. So that's what we do. So in veterinary medicine, I've had it with vet techs. I've had discussions with them to help them find that sweet spot with their bosses, how to really have that conversation. And then, of course, with the veterinarians who want to talk to the client, but have been taught in school, just shut up and call us, meaning the insurance company. And I always advise veterinarians that if they call me and they want to have me help, that they have to call their insurance company first because, that's the other thing. They never read their malpractice insurance policy, ever. So they don't know what the rules of the road are, what they have to do. I said, first of all, if you'd send me your policy, I'm happy to read it and explain it to you, or you can read it and understand. I said, but most of them say you have to call them if somebody walks out and says, I'm going to sue you. You have to really call because that could be something that could threaten your ability to be covered by the insurance company that you didn't give them proper notice. However, you can also call them and say, listen, I really like Crystal. Crystal left angry and I want to call her, but she did say things that are a little nerve-wracking. And the insurance company can say, well, we can take it from here. And if you have the gumption, which I hope all of you do who are listening to this, to say, I'd like to do this by myself with the help of someone, Crystal probably does this, I do this, who will help me talk to the client without getting myself in deeper water, and yet be able to resolve it in a way that this client becomes my best advocate. Because if you can get a client who's mad at you to say, Dr. Stokes, listen to me, heard what I had to say, shared with me how they felt, and we came to a resolution where both of us felt as if we were respected and understood for our point of view. Did I ever say in that discussion that we agreed?
I love it. Mediation is a big part of what we do in my company. And I was reflecting as you were talking of, I had one of the most fun meetings I've had in years last week, which is where I'm working with a team on site. We have a group of technicians and the doctor, and they've just had a few months of very challenging clients. And so we've done multiple sessions. The first one was like mapping out what kind of difficulties we're having. So we have clients that are quite fearful and anxious. We have clients who are angry and aggressive. We have clients that are very aloof and don't seem to remember or retain information. So we're going through these different client avatars. In this meeting, what we had done is we had assigned being the client, role playing the client to each of the staff members. So they can have empathy, building the empathy in, right? So, and then we had the hospital manager, and she's just phenomenal. She is an excellent mediator. She has wonderful people skills. She has great boundaries. Like, she was really perfect for playing this role. She played the hospital staff member. And what we had her do was to respond. So to the angry client, first respond by being extremely passive and like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, oh, like just fawning and falling backwards. And we had her do something kind of in the middle. Then we had her do a more assertive approach of like, excuse me, like we're going to need to pause here. And then we have the team observe this. Like, what did you notice between these three different ways of responding to an angry client?
How did you feel watching it?
Yeah, I know. That's where people really learn, because it's not like you're watching a boring PowerPoint. We're feeling it. And these are the kind of meetings that I find to be by far the most helpful, because it's in your DNA now. You can't unknow it, both feeling what it's like to be in that person's shoes and also witnessing it. And it's so clear which interactions actually work. The doctor of this group, I'm so impressed with her level of emotional intelligence. She's quite masterful. Like, I think she's kind of black belt level. And she's also the kind of person who is very client centric. She will call them back. She is very engaged with the client. And I think that is, she's a great role model for the team. So I was just, I was in my little happy place imagining them and what they are experiencing and thinking about the work you do, the similarities there. But bringing somebody in like Debra, like our team, it's just, if you're struggling with this, go to the pros. Don't reinvent the wheel. These things are trainable skills. Once you learn it, you know it for the rest of your life, and you can have a better relationship with conflict for the rest of your life. I can get on the soapbox all day, as you can tell, but I'm wondering, as we're kind of coming down the home stretch, I wanted to bring this home to people who are listening. A lot of us are short on time. Our mental bandwidth might be a bit limited. So if we have takeaways that you want to leave people with today, that if they remember nothing else of the great stories we've told, you want them to like hang on to when they finish this podcast today, what would those things be?
Well, I'm speaking at AVMA in Austin on this. I'm doing a workshop, and I will be sharing my stop, drop, and roll, which is easy. And I always tell my veterinary partners who I work with, put it up in the exam room, because it'll be that visual trigger, that memory trigger. It'll be right there for you to look at when you're feeling yourself getting upset. So it's stop talking and listen, drop the need to be right, and let what they're saying roll off your back, because you're not in their shoes. They could have had a fight with their husband, their wife, their kids in the morning. They could have had a car accident. They could have spilled coffee all over themselves, whatever it was. You don't know why they're reacting this way. And go with grace, I always say. So we talked about being curious. We talked about breathing. But stop, drop, and roll is so easy, because all of us have had that when we were younger. You're on fire, and you have to stop, drop, and roll so you don't burn up. Well, if you are seeing conflict and then the red in your eyes and the red in someone else's eyes, it's like being on fire. So stop, drop, and roll. Stop talking and listen. Drop the need to be right. And then let what's being said roll off your back, because in doing that, you are not engaging in escalating the disagreement. I've had veterinarians after I've given workshops come up to me and say, my God, it works. I said, really? I find that hard to believe. Because they said, I often say after I do stop, drop, and roll, I said, and most of the time they'll come back and apologize to you. Clients will, or staff members will, or veterinarians will. So if you do it in the staff section as well, that's fine. Because most people, you and I, Crystal, talked about this before we got on. After you have said something, you go, oh, shit, I wish I didn't say that. And if you don't add fuel to the fire, which is roll, right? You're not adding fuel to the fire. You're letting it roll off your back. You're saying, okay, I'm just going to give her a minute. She's going to do this and we're going to figure it out. And 9 times out of 10, they'll come back and go, I am so sorry, Dr. Smith. I don't know what got into me. I just, I spilled coffee. I had a fight with my husband, my kids, whatever they say, that's fine. And you say, well, I really recognize that something must have truly been wrong. And I'm so glad that we were able to get to this place now.
Beautiful. I really appreciate your message. I don't know if I'm going to be at AVMA yet, but if I'm there, we need to hang out. I'd love to come hear your talk.
Oh, I can't wait.
Okay. And for everybody listening today, if they want to connect with you to get help, to learn more, what's the best way for them to find you?
Well, they can find me at Hamilton Law and Mediation. So you can just do Hamilton Law and A&D Mediation. You could find me. Or you can go to the Why Do Pets Matter podcast. I'm there. I also have a bi-monthly call because your clients don't know what to do with the care of their pets, long-term, short-term. So this is my, as we say, lost leader, so to speak, because it's close to my heart. I broke my ankle. I didn't have a plan for the care of my pets. So I hold a Wednesday night meeting at 6:30 Eastern Time, the first and third Wednesdays of every month. If you go on HamiltonLawandMediation.com, you'll see where you can sign up. It's free. And it's just to have people recognize what you need to do to keep your pets safe. So whether you're a veterinarian, whether you're a vet tech, I'm sure I actually just spoke to a bunch of attorneys who are trust and estate attorneys, and none of them had a plan for their pet. And I said, how do you think you're going to sell this to your client if you don't have it yourself? So I hope everyone who gets in touch with me, we can resolve it without litigation and, of course, in the veterinary world, without license review, because I don't care who you are. Crystal, you have a license. I have a license. If somebody calls up and says, somebody's made a complaint against your license and we're having a hearing, how much sleep do we get?
0.
Yeah. So if I can stop that from happening, which is sort of my bailiwick, I want to stop people from filing, which is easy to do, complaints with the licensing bureau because they are going to get a better answer from the veterinarian themselves. That's what I do.
I love your work. Debra, thank you so much for being on with us today. This has been really fun.
Well, I'm so glad you invited me, and we'll have to have you on Why Do Pets Matter?
I'd love to. Definitely. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.